That she could not understand what was happening to her was to be expected, given the fact that her mind was failing. And yet, remarkably, such was the power of her insight and self-observation that for a long time she did indeed know that her mind was failing. Back when she was capable of such things, she had even told him what she needed, although it took months for him to understand. Once, soon after moving into the so-called independent living facility, in that room on the top floor, with the view of the back lawn, she had tried to tell him. As was his wont, he had been trying to be honest with her about her condition, about her prognosis. He never wanted to lie to her, and upon some remark he had made, she had told him, "That isn't very comforting." And those words stung him deeply, since he recognized that he had hurt her without wanting or trying to, and since he recognized at that moment that it had been comfort she had been wanting, and not comfort he had been giving. But it would take a few more months for him to realize more consciously, and in a more determined way, that it was comfort he needed to give her. It was in the so-called memory care unit of the assisted living facility, where she had moved when it became clear that independent living wasn't cutting it for her, that her aides made him more aware of what his mother needed. "She just wants companionship," they would say. Or they would tell him, "I sat beside her in bed and talked to her and held her hand until she fell asleep." He would come to hold her hand as she lay in bed, waiting for sleep to come, sometimes waiting a long time, since sleep never came easily to these two members of that family, and he was grateful to have learned that she needed hand-holding, even as he was ashamed that a stranger had to tell him what it might mean to care for his own mother. Of course, those women, for it was invariably women who cared for the elderly in those places, not men, knew from decades of doing this kind of work just what was needed. They provided it with patience, asking nothing except respect, and when respect was wanting, as it sometimes is with those who have lost so many of their faculties, they asked for it, demanded it, and got it, as humans need to, even in the most difficult of times. These women, of course, had done this kind of work for decades, and so they knew what he did not know, could not have known, that it was comfort she needed. Yes, it was comfort she needed, and comfort he learned to give, speaking softly, in a low, warm voice, asking her not what she wanted, since she had long since stopped being able to say, but whether she wanted this or that, would she like to do this or that, offering her the opportunity to do the few things she was still capable of doing, so that she might hold on, however tenuously, for a few weeks longer to the sense that she was capable, knowing she would never be, nor see herself to be, as super-capable as she had been. But he still reproached himself for not understanding fast enough everything there was to understand about this failing brain, these fraying nerves, about the comfort and choices she needed. His governing myth, he had long thought, was never Oedipus, as the Freudians would have wanted it, but rather Orpheus, he who looks back and sees and recognizes what he wants and needs only at the moment when having becomes, in a word, impossible. Oedipus tragically doesn't know. Orpheus knows too late. It's not his knowledge that is out of joint, it's his time. And a too late realization is worse than none at all, since the realization is then impotent. It cannot act, and time being what it is, fixing is not a thing we can do in retrospect. When he had moved from San Francisco to Los Angeles, he had been so careful to make little pilgrimages to all his favorite places. He needed to say goodbye, even to places. It was as if a missed leave-taking somehow left a hole inside you. You must say goodbye. It was imperative. And yet, in the taxi on the way to the airport, he drove past a favorite spot he had neglected to visit, and a pang struck him as if he had insulted someone or would never see a loved one again. Perhaps his Orpheus complex could be traced to David's death these many years ago. The shock of a peer dying, a young man in his early 20s, the strange feeling of being told this improbable thing, the way David had been hit by a truck, his dead pocket-picked, his death unknown for days. A person could just disappear without a trace, and then later it would seem impossible. Perhaps that had marked him, that and not having had the chance to say goodbye. And of course, during the AIDS crisis, there were so many leave-takings and goodbye sayings missed or avoided. Had they all piled on top of one another to create this psychological complex? Or was he marked for such a fear by some particular predisposition? Sometimes he tried to avoid saying goodbye, not realizing that we never stop saying goodbye, and so not starting is no solution, even makes things worse. It hardly mattered, for now the time when he would be able to comfort her was likely past. The time might as well have been hit by a truck. It had happened so quickly, and of course, when he was not looking. He had only been gone a few days. He saw her on Wednesday night before leaving town for the long Labor Day weekend. It was Thursday when a doctor called to say his mother had fallen and perhaps broken her hip, perhaps not. And then it was Saturday. A nurse had called to say she had broken her shoulder and would go to the ER, and she had gone from the ER to the hospital, and he had returned from his planned long weekend Sunday instead of Tuesday, and he had seen her Sunday, but she was asleep. She had woken up and looked at him and called him by name and peacefully gone back to sleep. But Monday he found her awake, and her voice was low and soft, and he thought she was just tired. It was only Wednesday, when she had returned to the nursing home, that he had seen how far she had fallen. Had it only been a week? Had he missed the chance to say goodbye? She was sitting in a wheelchair watching TV. She had never watched TV before, only particular shows at particular times, or used the TV as a device for watching videotapes or DVDs. She never sat and watched what was unspooling at that particular hour. Yet there she was in the dining area of the nursing home, watching Lucille Carmichael meet George Burns as a studio audience laughed loudly. She only vaguely smiled in response to the colorful images and the blaring dialogue and laughter, but her eyes remained on the screen, as they never would have done before. Well, it's over now, he thought to himself, with a feeling of relief, which would pass soon enough. She is mostly gone. He wheeled her to her room, where her walker sat unused, likely never to be used again. He needed help getting her from the wheelchair to the bed. She could no longer walk. She could no longer carry on a conversation. She could only say no. Do you need to potty? No. Do you want some chocolate? No. No was her only choice. At least she still had a choice. He held her hand. Give me my hand, she said, as if wanting it back. She said it again and again. Not knowing what to do, he would stop holding her hand, and she would reach for it again. Once she stopped, reached up to scratch her eye, then reached again for his hand, carefully interlacing her fingers with his. Help me, help me, help me. She said it again and again. He tried his canned responses. I am helping you. That's what I'm here for, to help you. I helped you get to bed. I helped you change into your nightgown. Finally, I don't know what you want. Are you in pain? No. Do you want to sit up? He helped her sit up, sat beside her, put his arm around her, rested his head on top of hers, and she was quiet for a while. Then again, help me. Are you tired? Yes, I'm tired. Do you want to lie down? Yes. And he helped her to lie down. What am I doing? You're tired. You're lying down. What should I do? There's nothing you need to do. You're tired. You're lying down. You're just waiting to fall asleep. He sat for a long time looking into her eyes, and she into his. He cried then like that for several minutes, wiping away the tears as he needed. She looked at him intently. If she was thinking something, she could no longer tell him what it was. So many things were now in the past, and he would never be able to fix the things that had gone wrong. A few years earlier, he had seen her when someone nearby was holding a small baby, and someone else had asked her if she wanted to hold the baby, and she said no. And he saw the look on her face and her physical demeanor, rigid, withdrawn, her arms close to her body, and he realized she had a terror of infants, of their fragility and their need, and it suddenly struck him that she must have been this way when he had been a baby, as his sister had been before him, and that the damage he had felt and his sister had felt from their childhood years was not limited to their father's alcoholism and physical abuse, of which his mother had also been a victim, but was only the sensible portion of an insensible depth that went down to the fear that she had of taking care of delicate young creatures. She never liked kittens or puppies, or even cats or dogs for that matter. And yet she had become an educational psychologist, studied human development at a prestigious school at a time when the field was nascent, earned advanced degrees, pioneered the practice of the field, and written and published. She must have known what she did not know, understood what she did not understand and feared, and tried mightily and successfully to become what the handicapped children she treated needed most, not a mother, but an expert. She was never an expert mother, sometimes hardly a mother at all. Not that he could blame her for her failings as a mother. Given the absence throughout her childhood of her striving immigrant parents, she could hardly be expected to know anything about nurturing, never having been nurtured herself. And since her husband's alcoholism had long thwarted her professional ambitions, and his physical abuse heaped on an already fragile mental state, she could hardly have had the strength to take care of anyone, never really having learned even to take care of herself. If only he could have known everything earlier, he thought, what dementia was, and why she seemed nervous and couldn't finish anything, and why it was getting harder for her to walk, and that it was comfort she needed, and that this medication didn't work, and that one did, but only briefly, and what skilled nursing was, and how it was different from assisted living. This all came back to him the next night when he told his mother, "One day, I will forgive myself for not knowing what I could not have known, not doing what I could not have done, not being who it was not in me to be. But it will be long, long after I have forgiven you for not knowing what you could not have known, not doing what you could not have done, not being what it was not in you to be." It was not goodbye, but then, with his mother, he had never stopped saying goodbye, had ceaselessly maintained the project of saying goodbye. He had tried to be a better mother to her than she ever had or had been, not to outdo her, but to make up in some small way for what they had both missed. For though it is sometimes puzzling, we can miss terribly, even most terribly, the things we never had. But she was not there to hear what he told her, for he could not bear to go and see her that Thursday night, to look at her again and to cry again, to know that she could no longer walk and could only repeat those same few phrases, and perhaps occasionally say no. Was it any wonder that he had lain instead on his bed in that room that became darker and darker as the sun set, and cried inconsolably, yelping like an animal? He had trouble picking up on his own feelings, except indirectly, and so he observed to himself that night that things must be bad for him, yes, very bad, since he could no longer write about himself in the first person. After crying himself to sleep, as babies, we are told, must learn to do, he awoke in the dark and turned on a light, not to arise, not to get up, but to go back to sleep, for it had long been the case with him for almost 2 years now, since moving to New Haven, that he had never been able to go to sleep without leaving a light on.